They are not shocked because you found an answer. They are shocked because you stopped fighting the way they taught you to fight. While they were still measuring the problem with pride, contacts, money, reputation, and the old habit of forcing doors open, Allah placed one quiet opening in your heart and the entire maze lost its power. You may have spent months looking helpless from the outside, saying little, absorbing insults, pretending not to notice who was pleased by your confusion, but one night something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. No thunder came through the ceiling. No one saw your forehead touching the ground while your chest carried a pressure you could not explain to anyone. No one saw the tears you wiped before dawn, the way you whispered to Allah with no elegant words left, only exhaustion, shame, need, and surrender. Yet, by morning, your eyes were different. The same situation that looked impossible yesterday began to show its weak points. The people who had circled it for years, protecting their own ego, repeating the same mistakes, blaming fate while avoiding truth, suddenly watched you move with a clarity they did not understand. This is where the awe begins. Not because you're above them, not because hardship made you untouchable, but because Allah can train a servant in silence until one moment of guided insight becomes heavier than decades of human calculation. When Allah gives Basira, inner sight, you do not just see what is happening. You see what must no longer be fed, what must be left alone, what must be confronted, and what must be entrusted back to you. Shit. People often think your breakthrough came too fast. They do not know how long your soul was being prepared before the night arrived. They count the hours of the solution, but Allah counted the years of sabr. They see the outcome and call it sudden. You remember the isolation, the humiliation, the restraint, the prayers that seemed unanswered, the enemies who smiled warmly while hoping you would stay trapped. That night did not create you. That night revealed what Allah had already been building inside you. The false interpretation is that you were lucky, clever, or favored in a way that makes you superior to others. This is where the heart must be careful, because the same moment that makes others stare can become a test for you. Allah may lift a veil from a problem, but He also watches what you do with the lifting. Do you become arrogant toward those that are still lost in the same confusion? Do you speak as if your prayer commanded the heavens? Do you confuse divine help with personal greatness? The awakened servant knows the danger of being praised after being hidden. There is a kind of praise that sounds sweet but can poison the sincerity that carried you through the night. They say, "How did you know?" And you almost want to explain the logic, the pattern, the missing detail, the one step everyone ignored, but deep down you know the real answer cannot fit inside a normal explanation. You did not solve it because your mind became magical. You solved it because Allah allowed your heart to stop clinging to noise. For years, everyone may have been asking, how do we win? While you were finally asking, what is true? There is a difference. Winning still leaves room for ego. Truth does not. Truth makes you escape loss if that loss protects your soul. Truth makes you walk away from a door if opening it would corrupt your intention. Truth makes you apologize when your pride wanted applause. Truth makes you refuse revenge even when revenge seems available. And when a person becomes willing to obey truth more than protect image, solutions appear that were impossible under the weight of self-deception. This is why some people cannot understand what happened. They tried to solve the matter without surrendering their ego, so the matter remained locked. You surrendered the ego first, then the matter became small. They spent decades sharpening tools while Allah was asking for a softened heart. They thought the barrier was external, but the real barrier was the unseen knot inside the chest. Once Allah untied that knot, the same facts arranged themselves differently. Nothing about the room changed, but you were no longer the same person standing in it. The counterexample is important because not every person who waits is patient, and not every person who speaks of faith is guided by faith in that moment. Some people stay in a problem for years, not because Allah has denied them a way out, but because they keep protecting the very desire that keeps them stuck. They want relief without repentance, clarity without humility, victory without purification. They want Allah to bless a plan built on resentment, envy, control, or the need to prove everyone wrong. You may have been that person once, and perhaps that is why this awakening feels so heavy. You remember what it was like to pray while secretly hoping Allah would punish someone in a way that satisfied your pain. You remember mistaking silence for weakness, mistaking delay for abandonment, mistaking your loneliness for evidence that you were forgotten. Then life pressed you until your dua became less theatrical and more honest. You stopped asking only for the situation to change and began asking Allah to change what the situation exposed in you. That is when the training deepened. If this part speaks to something you lived through quietly, let your like be a small acknowledgement of gratitude, not to me, but to the mercy that carried you when no one could see the battle. Because the truth is, the one who solves in a night may have spent many nights being solved by Allah first. Before the answer arrives, the servant is often stripped of false dependencies. The friend who always had advice becomes unavailable. The person who promised support becomes distant. The plan that looked secure collapses at the weakest hinge. The enemy you feared turns out to be less dangerous than the fear inside you. Even your own intelligence fails you for a season, so you stop worshipping your ability to calculate. This is not punishment in the simple way people assume. Sometimes it is protection. Allah may block the obvious road because the obvious road leads to a version of you that would gain the world and lose tenderness toward Him. He may allow people to underestimate you because their underestimation keeps you hidden long enough to mature. He may let you be alone because the crowd would have interrupted the conversation your soul needed to have with its Lord. By the time the night of clarity comes, you are no longer begging to look powerful. You only want to be clean before Allah. This is where the behavioral contrast becomes visible. They talk more when they're afraid. You become quieter. They rush to gather witnesses. You return to prayer. They expose people to protect themselves. You ask Allah to protect you from becoming unjust while defending your name. They treat every conflict as a battlefield. You begin to recognize which battles are traps. This does not mean you become passive, naive, or easy to harm. Spiritual discipline is not weakness dressed in religious language. It is the ability to act without being ruled by panic. It is making the phone call after you have calmed your tongue. It is answering the accusation with facts instead of rage. It is leaving the gathering before your lower self enjoys humiliating someone. It is refusing to gossip about the person who wounded you, even though you know details that would change how everyone sees them. It is keeping your prayer when your heart feels dry, keeping your boundaries when guilt tries to drag you back, keeping your trust in Allah when the result is not yet visible. Imagine a person sitting at a kitchen table after midnight. The house is quiet, but the mind is loud. Papers are spread out, messages are open, a decision has to be made by morning. For years, the family has argued about the same matter. One side blames money, another blames betrayal, another blames timing. Everyone has a story, but no one has faced the truth. This person finally closes the laptop, makes wudu, prays 2 simple rak'ahs and says, "O Allah, do not let me choose from fear. Do not let me choose from pride. Show me the step that pleases you." After prayer, the answer is not a mystical spectacle. It is a clear sentence in the heart: stop negotiating with dishonesty. By morning, they make one clean decision. They refuse the corrupt offer. They end the cycle of false promises. They accept a smaller path with more peace. And suddenly the decades-old knot begins to loosen. The people who built their lives around delay are stunned by the simplicity. But simplicity only looks simple after surrender has done its work. Still, there is a nuance that must not be ignored. Sometimes solving the problem does not mean getting the outcome you wanted. Sometimes the solution is recognizing that the thing you begged to repair was meant to be released. The one-night breakthrough may not be a business restored, a relationship healed, a reputation repaired, or an enemy exposed. It may be the courage to stop pouring your soul into what Allah has already removed barakah from. It may be the sudden understanding that your grief was not proof of failure, but proof that you loved something beyond its appointed time. People may be in awe because you walked away without the dramatic closure they expected. They thought you would argue for months, chase explanations, collect apologies, or remain emotionally chained to a door that no longer opened. Instead, you became still. You did not announce your healing. You simply stopped returning to the wound as if it were a home. This kind of strength is not easily understood in a world that confuses noise with power. There are people who only believe you have won if someone else looks defeated, but the servant trained by Allah begins to understand that some victories leave no visible opponent on the ground. The victory is that your heart no longer shakes when their name appears. The victory is that you can remember the betrayal without becoming ugly inside. The victory is that you do not need to be seen as innocent by everyone, because Allah knows the parts no human court could hold. And sometimes the hidden enemy was not only the person plotting against you, it was the version of you that needed their downfall in order to feel whole. Allah may protect you from others, but He also protects you from yourself. That protection can feel like loss at first. It can feel like being denied the final word. It can feel like swallowing fire while people misunderstand your silence. But later, you realize the silence saved you from a sin your anger was ready to justify. You wanted exposure. Allah gave you elevation through restraint. You wanted them to admit what they did. Allah taught you to stand without their confession. The awe in others often comes from a deeper discomfort. They recognize that you reached through surrender what they could not reach through control. This unsettles people who built their identity on being experienced, strategic, untouchable, or worldly wise. They may have spent decades perfecting the art of managing appearances, knowing who to flatter, when to speak, which truth to bury, which person to use. Then, someone they overlooked enters the situation with a heart broken enough to be sincere, and Allah grants them a clean perception that cuts through the performance. You see the one missing intention behind the whole conflict. You notice the lie everyone politely stepped around. You identify the fear that kept a family divided, the greed that kept partners arguing, the insecurity that kept a leader oppressive, the old wound that kept someone repeating harm. You do not see it because you are cynical. You see it because hardship trained you to read what people do not say. But even here, you must remain humble. Insight is a trust. Seeing through people does not give you permission to despise them. It gives you responsibility to move wisely, protect what Allah entrusted to you, and avoid becoming intoxicated by perception. A heart with basira should become more merciful, not more cruel. It should become firm without becoming arrogant. Later in this video, ask yourself this and leave your answer in a comment. If you can put it into words, what hardship taught you to see clearly that you used to overlook? That question matters because spiritual awakening is not only about escaping pain, it is about learning what the pain revealed. Maybe you learned that not everyone who speaks softly is safe. Maybe you learned that your need to be loved made you ignore warnings. Maybe you learned that Allah delayed something because your intention was not ready to carry it. Maybe you learned that peace is not found by controlling every person around you, but by standing where Allah can bless your next step. The people watching from the outside see only a quick decision. They do not see the years of discernment being carved into you by disappointment, discipline, and private repentance. There is also the reality of hidden enemies, and it must be spoken about without turning the heart paranoid. Not everyone who stands near you is praying for your ease. Some people are disturbed by your growth because your obedience exposes their compromise. Some are unsettled by your calm because they benefited from your confusion. Some liked you better when you needed their approval, when you explained yourself too much, when you panicked after every cold message or delayed response. When Allah begins strengthening you, certain relationships start revealing their true shape. The person who once gave advice now becomes irritated that you no longer obey blindly. The one who enjoyed being your emotional shelter becomes offended when you take your grief to Allah first. The one who fed you fear calls your trust irresponsibility. The one who manipulated your guilt calls your boundaries pride. These moments are tests, not invitations to hatred. You do not need to label everyone an enemy just because they cannot walk with you into your next season. Some people are weak, not malicious. Some are wounded, not wicked. Some are simply attached to the older version of you because that version made them feel important. The believer must be careful with judgment because Allah sees layers we cannot see. Yet, caution is not suspicion, and mercy is not blindness. You can forgive someone and still stop giving them access to your decisions. You can make dua for someone and still refuse their pattern. You can wish them guidance and still recognize that their presence weakens your obedience. When Allah protects you silently, He may not always expose the person publicly. Sometimes He simply removes your emotional dependence on them. Sometimes He lets their words lose power. Sometimes He allows a small contradiction to reveal the larger truth. Sometimes He delays your plan just long enough for their intention to surface before you sign, agree, commit, or return. This is unseen mercy. You thought the delay was blocking you, but the delay was screening the room. You thought the unanswered message was rejection, but it was a shield. You thought being left out was humiliation, but it kept you away from a table where your sincerity would have been used. The awakened servant learns to thank Allah not only for what arrived, but for what never reached them. Divine timing is often most painful right before it becomes understandable. The night you solved what took them decades may have come after a long season where nothing made sense. You watched people with less sincerity move faster. You watched doors open for those who cut corners. You watched your own effort return with silence. There were days when tawakkul did not feel peaceful. It felt like standing in an empty field with no map, trying not to accuse Allah with your disappointment. This is a delicate place in the soul. Many people speak beautifully about trust after the rescue, but the real test is before any sign appears. Trust is not pretending you are not tired. Trust is refusing to let tiredness become disbelief. Trust is saying, Allah knows, while still doing the next responsible thing. You send the message. You study the document. You apologize where you were wrong. You seek counsel from someone wise. You sleep instead of spiraling until dawn. You keep your obligations even when your emotions want to make life stop. Tawakkul is not spiritual laziness. It is disciplined reliance. It is tying the camel while knowing the camel is not your Lord. When the opening comes, it may look strangely ordinary. A sentence in a conversation, a detail in an old document, a memory that returns at the exact moment you need it, a sudden calm while everyone else is panicking, a refusal that saves you, a small act of courage that changes the direction of an entire family, business, marriage, or inner life. They may call it instinct. You know it was mercy. They may call it timing. You know Allah is the Lord of timing. They may say, "How did you figure that out overnight?" And you might smile because there is no way to explain the long education of Sabre to someone who only respects visible effort. Your answer did not come from avoiding action. It came from action purified by surrender. For years, the problem fed on fear, pride, and delay. One night, you stopped feeding it. That is why it weakened. Some knots are not untied by pulling harder. They loosen when the hand finally stops trembling. Becoming stronger through hardship does not mean becoming cold. This is another place where many people will misunderstand the awakened servant. They think because you no longer collapse, you no longer feel. They think because you speak less, your heart has emptied. They think because you can walk away, you did not love deeply. But the strength Allah builds is not numbness. It is a heart that still feels, but no longer lets every feeling become a command. It is a heart that can miss someone and still not return to harm. It is a heart that can be afraid and still choose obedience. It is a heart that can be misunderstood and still refuse to perform innocence for those committed to seeing guilt. This strength is quiet because it has nothing to prove. It does not need to announce, "I have changed." People notice because your old reactions are gone. The bait that once worked no longer moves you. The insult that once kept you awake now passes through a guarded place. The silence that once terrified you now becomes room for prayer. You stop making permanent decisions from temporary storms. You stop confusing intensity with truth. You stop calling every closed door a tragedy. This is not easy, and it does not happen in a straight line. Some nights you will still feel the old ache. Some memories will still press against your ribs. Some names will still test the sincerity of your forgiveness. But you return again and again to Allah. That returning is the real sign. Not perfection, not constant peace, not never crying. The sign is that after every wave, you know where to face. The people in awe may think you discovered a shortcut, but you know there was no shortcut. There was training, there were private collapses that did not become public sins, there were temptations to retaliate that you swallowed for Allah. There were opportunities to compromise that you refused when no one would have known. There were mornings when you carried yourself with dignity after nights when you barely recognized your own strength. By the time the breakthrough came, it did not make you loud. It made you more careful because you understood how close a person can come to despair before mercy opens a narrow door. So when they look at you with surprise, let it remind you of Allah, not yourself. Their awe is not your throne. It is evidence that human beings often underestimate what divine guidance can do with a humbled heart. You do not need to explain every hidden chapter. You do not need to convince them that the night was real, that the prayer was real, that the insight was not borrowed from their systems or stolen from their wisdom. Let them wonder without feeding your ego. Let the solution stand without turning it into a performance. What Allah gave you in secrecy should not be wasted in showing off. Move with gratitude, protect your discipline, and remember how easily a heart can become veiled again when it starts admiring its own light. The problem that took them decades was not defeated because you are a chosen exception to the human condition. It was defeated because Allah can guide a servant who finally stops lying to themselves. He can place one true thought inside a tired mind and make years of confusion collapse. He can use loneliness as a classroom, delay as a shield, enemies as mirrors, restraint as purification, and hardship as the pressure that forms a soul capable of carrying clarity. The final strike is quiet. They are not really in awe of you. They are in awe of what happens when a person who is supposed to break instead bows, waits, listens, and rises with an answer that pride could never reach.